Today, we are very lucky to be joined by two amazing women who have shared this experience of being diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, and who are in their own ways working to challenge the stigma and build better workplaces for neurodiverse people. So if we go by who's on the left of my screen, we have Rachelle Denton, who is the Global Social Media Director at the Lego Group, but we also know her well because Rachelle moonlights as a facilitator for Minds at Work's Hive program. It's our flagship peer support program. Prior to joining Lego, she has helped to solve digital strategy challenges for brands like Warner Brothers, Pottermore, Nando's, ASOS, and 10 Downing Street. Rachelle is also a mother to a neurodiverse son, which adds another interesting dimension to her journey. So we're very thankful that she's joined us here. Hello, Rachelle.
Hello.
And Kim Thor is on a mission to build a world where neurodiverse people feel empowered to bring their authentic selves to work. A British Vietnamese ADHD coach and entrepreneur, she is an avid public speaker on neurodiversity and mental health. She set up Own Your Flair, which aims to be the go-to platform for supporting neurodiverse individuals in workplaces. Kim also works part-time at LSE Generate, the entrepreneurship hub at LSE. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, so excited to be here.
Nice one. So how today's going to work is it's very much a conversation between Kim and Rachelle, but we want to make sure that you can all get involved as well, because as we saw, you're all here with very personal interest in this topic. So we have a way for you to ask questions as we go. So don't feel, while we will wait till the end of the session to ask the questions, please, as they come up, ask them at that time. April, lovely tech support April, is going to just flash up a screen for us now with a QR code on it. We use something called AHA slides, which means that your questions won't get missed. We don't have the slide itself, April. We've got your email. There we go. So AHA slides, if you just scan that QR code, it'll take you to a website where you can ask questions as we go along, either anonymously or with your name. If you don't have QR code possibilities, you can see a link up the top there is ahaslides.com/askthis. And yeah, just ask your questions as you go along and we will bring them up at the end of the session. You can also see what everybody else is asking that way, and you can upvote them. So if you think someone has asked a brilliant question and you want to make sure that we tackle it, give it a little arrow up and we can see how popular the questions are. Okay, we've got 11 out of 50 going in. So yeah, excellent, thank you. If you didn't catch that QR code, let us know, and maybe April, you can pop it back up in a sec, or pop the link into the chat. But let's get started by having a chat. So we're going to look at two different aspects of the neurodiversity journey today, the personal and the professional. So we're going to start with the personal, and we obviously have two wonderful people here in the room, so do feel free to chat amongst yourselves as well while we go on. I will take it in turns who I won't say pick on because that's a horrible word to say, but who I asked to lead that question. So perhaps, Kim, if we start with you for this one, how did you discover your neurodiversity? Can you talk a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, so specifically with ADHD, because I was diagnosed with dyslexia at university, and it was just struggling with essays and plagiarizing, and then my tutor saying, I think you might want to go and get assessed for, dyslexia or anything like that, because if you're saying you didn't mean to plagiarize, then I believe you. So through that, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. But since this is about ADHD, it was primarily from the COVID. So what happened with COVID, as soon as everyone was working from home, all my coping mechanisms in life were taken away from me. So the gym, seeing friends, I couldn't even go out to get fresh air unless I exercised. So I think that all the support networks just being pulled away from me kind of plunged me into a deep depression I've never felt before. And that was the first time I was diagnosed with severe depression. But I knew something else was going on because I just couldn't focus on my work. I'd be, analyzing. I mean, at that time I was working as a equity researcher. I was analyzing all these spreadsheets, and I was just looking at everything, and it just, nothing just connected, nothing made sense. I just couldn't focus on anything. And that was when I started researching and realized that dyslexia has a high co-occurrence with ADHD. So it's around 40%. And I looked at the ADHD symptoms, and everything on there just started making sense. So the focus, the hyperactivity, the lack of prioritization, all these symptoms just suddenly made sense to me that couldn't be explained by depression and wasn't explained by dyslexia either. So for me, that was the moment when you can say all the dots aligned, despite my diagnosis of depression, which I think for women, we do get misdiagnosed a lot.
That's really interesting, actually, that it was yeah. So you had suspected it beforehand, but it was really the pandemic and the depression that made you question some of these diagnoses.
I actually never heard of ADHD before the pandemic. I mean, none of my friends have ever spoken about neurodiversity. So I actually never came across it, but it was the support networks being pulled away at COVID and my research skills essentially that connected the dots. Yeah.
And where did you go from there then? Did you speak to a doctor, or what was your next step in the process?
To get a diagnosis. Like, there was no qualms about it because I was struggling at work and I knew I needed the diagnosis to, formally get any accommodations. So I called my GP and I said, I suspect I have ADHD. These are my symptoms. Luckily, my GP believed me, which was a surprise because I was ready with a stack of evidence. I was very hyper-focused. Like, I think that was the only time during the pandemic where I was so motivated on a single task, which was to get a diagnosis. So I had all the evidence kind of written out, all the points ready, and my GP, believed me. I think it helped that she was a female maybe, and I was really emphasizing that, hey, I might lose my job. This is really serious. Yeah, and then she told me that the waiting times was going to be 11 months. And I said, this won't do. I need this immediately. Like, this is really dire situation for me. I don't feel well. I might lose my job and my world feels like it's falling apart. I can't wait 11 months. So again, I was prepared to pay privately for ADHD assessment. But then I found out about the right to choose. This is getting a bit technical, but the right to choose is a law that was passed in 2018. Which gives you, the patient, the power to tell your GP where you want your mental health care. So before, if you wanted, help for specific mental health care, the GP would pick a place for you, but now you can tell them where you want your care. And so that applies with an ADHD assessment. So I told my GP, through the right to choose law, I would like you to refer me to this private practice, which is private, but they also serve NHS clients. I would like you to pay for that under the right to choose law. My GP didn't know about the law, so I had to educate my GP about it. But as soon as I told her about it, she referred me and I got an assessment within a month and then was on medication 2 weeks later.
Oh, amazing. So yeah, definitely those research skills coming in there, and
yeah.
and it's really actually important to know all of those laws as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I'd say hyper-focus, which is a ADHD superpower. I mean, when you are emotionally charged and have one single goal, you will put in that hours. And that was just amazing because I got my assessment within a month and all my friends said, how did this happen? You were like a rocket. So just wanted to share hyper-focus.
Awesome. Yeah, tick the superpower. We will collect them as we go along today. Awesome. And Rachelle, how about you? I know you've recently been diagnosed as well in the last few years. So what's been your journey with neurodiversity?
Perhaps unsurprisingly, mine's also COVID related. So to be honest, I actually never suspected that I was neurodiverse. it wasn't a thing I understood, and the things that I now understand to be signs of neurodiversity, I thought were just my quirky character traits, which is interesting that I decided that's why I'm different, just because it just must be who I am. So I was actually fairly clueless, if I'm honest, about my own neurodiversity for a long time. I had accidentally created work structures that suited a neurodiverse way of working. I was a contractor, effectively working with very big businesses and very complex organizational change. So for ticking superpowers, one of those things was being able to connect different parts of businesses to work better together, to understand each other better, because I could see patterns that other people weren't looking for and weren't invested in, but actually made great business efficiencies. So I was quite successful at that, but I had multiple clients at once. Mostly involved marching from one side of London to the other a lot. So there was physical breaks in between mental sprints, which is a really good thing if you have ADHD, didn't know that. And a really very rich social life of experimenting and trying new things, which London quite affords. All those things went away in COVID, and they kind of coincided with my son, who's now 6, just getting into in and out of, because of COVID, obviously, nursery and school. And them flagging, look, he's got these difficulties. I went through the criteria with my husband, and I would distinctly remember saying, this is a bit ridiculous though. Like, is it ADHD? Because at least half of these things are just things that I do. Like, maybe it's just being a really expressive, outgoing personality that just is really interested in the world. And he's like, it's funny you should say that. Maybe you should also start looking at a diagnosis, in which I was instantly offended by, again, another ADHD trait of not being able to take on criticism or reflection very well. However, I accepted that perhaps I was wrong in this case, and that took me down the path of diagnosis. I did go to my doctor and say, people around me are saying I might have ADHD. I don't really know. This is a terrible way of getting a diagnosis, especially in a healthcare crisis. So my doctor said, oh, well, there's children that definitely know they have it, and they're definitely going to be in the queue before you are to get diagnosed. And so I went, fine, just point out a private clinic. So I knew nothing about what was shared here, that I could choose or do it. And I just, at the point, was like, I feel like my workload is crumbling around me, because I'm now in a desk, in a room, at a chair, and every time I have like a sprint of work, I'm finding myself cleaning the coffee grinder. That's why, I don't know. Why am I not concentrating on the things that are important to me? How am I wearing one sock? What's happened? COVID's making me fall apart mentally. Not true. And so I sorted private diagnosis. Involved in that diagnosis actually was very interesting to me. So I must ask my husband, people have known me for a long time, friends and family, to fill out a questionnaire. And in doing so, the feedback that came back was relatively shocking to me. I was doing a lot of things that people had also just accepted were Rachelle quirkisms, but ticked a lot of boxes throughout my whole life, in fact. So because I have not ever been seen as hyper, people would have dismissed that as an option. Really interesting stories that my cousin said, oh, I used to just think that it was really like you would only really engage in a game if it was a really good one, and I had to really impress you with my really good games, and once you just gave up and walked away and sat and read a book, then I know that I wasn't being entertaining enough. I had no idea. But I was like, I'm hyper focused, I am no longer engaged, and I will leave and take myself away. I didn't know I did this as a child, for example. So I think self-awareness is very powerful, but it didn't come to me for a very long time.
And that's actually a really nice segue into the next question, Rachelle. Thank you for that, because it's like we planned it. But you know, you've both mentioned in the past that being frustrated by that lack of awareness out there, and particularly around women. You know, we often hear ADHD in young boys, but you know, there seems to be a lot of women, adult women, now being diagnosed as well. And Kim, I know you've got a lot of thoughts around intersectionality as well with the awareness side of things. So maybe if we start with you, Kim, could you talk a little bit about the awareness and the intersectionality of ADHD and neurodiversity, and where the challenges may lie?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key thing to state that medical research is very gender biased towards the male, Caucasian male. And so in the neurodiversity space in particular, a lot of the studies on ADHD and autism, etc., has been on males. And so unsurprisingly, women, in terms of diagnostic manuals to be diagnosed, a lot of that doesn't reflect what like women struggle with. And so that's why ADHD has, in terms of women, which it plays out very differently in women, that doesn't get picked up by the GPs who don't believe us. So I'd say it's part of structural patriarchy. That's how I view it as a political scientist and a researcher. But applying it to a personal level, as a woman of color, I also feel that there's a lot kind of going on there apart from gender. So I'm Asian, obviously, and I was brought up where, you know, success looked a certain way. So you get the good grades, you get the high-powered jobs, you know, lawyer, doctor, whatever. I'm none of that, but anyway. But still ended up in finance and really working hard and compensating for my ADHD. So I remember back in school, I couldn't pay attention well, so I sat at the front. And if I forgot what a teacher said, I always put my hand up and said, sorry, I missed that. So I came off as the most engaged person, but actually, I was actually the most distracted. And also at university, to compensate my working memory and my dyslexia, I would be putting in the hours, a lot of hours. And that continued through work and developed into regular burnout and regular imposter syndrome. And I also think the other layer which made it very difficult on a personal level was the stereotype of, you know, successful Asians being, you know, very competent in a wide range of things. And honestly, I really struggled for a lot of things and struggled to meet that sort of stereotype. And if I explained to people that I was struggling with numbers, for example, they'd be like, you know, that is something you should be good at, no? You know, and those comments just really, really kind of started impacting me on a personal level, because it just made me feel like I wasn't living up to, you know, my parents' expectations, my own expectations, society expectations of how well, you know, it's all part of the model minority myth. But I just wanted to give that bit of flavor about, you know, how ADHD interplays with, you know, gender, race, you know, all those things. It really does matter.
How, and feel free to tell me not to ask this, but how did your family react when you got this diagnosis? How was the people around you reacting?
Yeah, so I think this is really important. Unfortunately, my parents are they're not the support system that that I need. And so I lean into a lot in terms of my community, which pretty much saved me. So when I did share with my mom that, you know, I was leaving work, I'm on medication, I'm very unhappy, and I've been diagnosed with something called ADHD, had to Google translate it, because there's no name in Vietnamese what it is. There's just no name. And my mom said, you know, you must have studied so hard, it drove you crazy. That's why you've developed this. And, you know, that wasn't really helpful. But the point was that I realized that my support network wasn't going to be my family. And I think support networks are so important for an ADHD sort of late diagnosis journey. You really need that network wherever you find it. So for me, it's digital, but for others, it could be family. But that is very important for healing.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Kim. Rachelle, how have you found, obviously you've been navigating this journey yourself and for your son as well. So how have you found that lack of awareness and just the general perceptions around ADHD?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can tell people my son has ADHD and they almost instantly can work out what that might show up looking like and what to expect from him and how to work around that. He also has autism, so people have a fairly generalized understanding. It is generalized, but they kind of know what to expect from him. I'd like to say surprises them a lot potentially as well, but they have an expectation of that. When I then go on to say, I also have ADHD, without fail, I get kind of a cocked eyebrow and air that goes with it. Sorry, what? Did you say you? You're not a little boy. So there is that weird assumption that I think a lot of people have, because I suspect, and this is, you know, I'm certainly not a doctor, but I suspect because the way in which a small boy often has ADHD is to be very verbose, very loud, very enthusiastic, taking up a lot of space in the room. There are women who are just like that as women. And so is it their personality? Is it not? They have much less likelihood to express hyperactivity in a way that is maybe considered typical. So what I've explained to people that I work with, for example, is that in women, it's very hard for us to keep track of physical objects. I will and have, and even this week have, lose important keys, like car keys or house keys. I don't know how, I don't know where, I've definitely dropped them somewhere. Doesn't feel like a thing that a conscious functioning, high functioning adult should do, and yet it will always happen. Wallets, you know, important items like this. I can go to the airport without a passport. I also manage a global team. You know, it doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to. So I think those things are impacting on you personally rather than kind of out into the world potentially. I move around a lot, but that's also perhaps perceived to be an outgoing personality trait, for example. I felt a little bit let down when I realized the complexity of a list for women. So one is, you know, about control as well as kind of exploding things that might be going in a pattern or doing well. So you could be seeking dopamine from perpetual relationships and relationship destruction. It could be changing jobs a lot of the time. Social media really draws a lot of people in the role I do, because you're going from pillar to post to pillar to post. There's a crisis, there's a crisis, there's a thing, there's a post, there's something else, there's a trend. It's a very dopamine filled role. So I think that's probably how I've been able to focus at work. But, you know, for example, women also experience things like eating disorders. They go into a hole, they don't eat anything, they come out of the hole, they're starving, they need the bathroom. What happened in the last hour? I'm not even entirely sure. And now I'm going to eat 12 things. So this extremism, I think, isn't something that's talked about, I feel like, openly enough. And there is a lot of things around that I was quite surprised were ADHD for me, especially in women, and not just like the thing that I used to get nicknamed all the time, which is, oh, you're so wild. And I was like, I don't feel like I'm so wild. I don't like the idea of jumping out of a plane. Why do people think I'm so chaotic? You know, I think, unfortunately, not understanding that many forms of medicine, there's different set of symptoms for women than there are men. There's a different set of symptoms for younger girls and younger boys. And there's a whole layer of things that go around that are influencing that as well.
Which obviously that will then manifest in the workplace and in your professional lives in different ways as well. These different sorts of symptoms and different ways of working, which seems like a good time to turn to the workplace, since mine's at work. So Rachelle, you've referenced the invisibility layer around neurodiversity in the workplace and how it's something that you have to choose to disclose, and some of those assumptions around it, which you've just touched on. Could you talk a little bit more about being a neurodiverse person in the workplace, particularly in a corporate such as you are, and how that sort of manifests for you?
Yeah, I think it is something you choose to disclose. It's not something that is obvious. I show up, people know I'm a woman. They hear that I'm foreign. They know, they can see I'm white. There's a whole lot of things that they know about me when I show up as who I am physically. But until I tell them that I am neurodiverse and I prefer to communicate in a different way, and in fact, some of their preferred ways of communicating won't work for me, then I'm not helping them understand the best ways of working with me. The problem here comes with confidence and or perception of success, right? So if I show up and say, your way of doing things is not going to work for me, I feel like I'm showing up and being difficult. I'm showing what I perceive to be something about myself that I don't see as a strength. In fact, I am expressing the best ways of working with me, so the best way of getting the best part of me. But I think it is easier to do as a senior person in a business, in a senior role, in a director and leadership role, than it is as a more junior person in a business. It's quite terrifying. For those of you who are managing people like this, I would like to have a parallel here. Can you imagine someone showing up to a meeting and being like, listen, I really struggle with reading charts. and how you might feel about that person and the perception you might bring to that. That is actually a fairly common thing I found with people with ADHD. There's a lot of information going left axis, right axis. You know, I can see if a chart's trending up or down, but if you want complex information, I might do better visually, I might do better orally, I might do better reading. There's no patterns here for this. And I think without that role modeling and representation, people often just not disclose this information. And I personally am very lucky at work in that when I show up to work with people on projects, I often say, by the way, I have ADHD, so stop me if I'm talking over you today. I feel a bit like I'm white. Whenever I say that, 9 times out of 10, I get a quiet, direct message on the side that says, me too. It's quiet and it's direct, and that is fine. But I think without that role modeling and support structure, you won't get the best out of the people that you're working with. And that is a hard circle. So there's undiagnosed people floating around out there that don't know it's okay to say, I find direct messaging very distracting. There's also people who do know that and are concerned that it might come across badly.
What do you have any advice for people who might be struggling with the disclosure side of things?
I mean, like everything that puts you in a D&I box, you're not responsible for educating the world. Like, you don't have to be. If you don't want to be, you don't have to be. And I think there's ways of saying, I prefer to work this way that doesn't have to disclose information that you don't want to. So I would say that first. There's nothing wrong with saying it, because once you do, you quickly find other people kind of feel the same. It's really great, I think, if you can be very clear about your preferred ways of communicating. I will regularly say to people, I'm terrible on email. If you need me to know a lot of detail, put it in an email, but otherwise don't expect very responsiveness from me. I struggle with email. I think it's okay to say that and then give a so. I'm like, so if it's short form, please get me on direct message. I'll be really responsive. Know yourself and your preferences. The easiest way, I think, to disclose is to give solutions.
Sure, that makes sense. And how about you, Kim? How has it manifested for you in the workplace, and how have you navigated that?
So I'm just going to reflect on my experiences in the corporate world, because I've been self-employed for the last year since leaving. So I think it's manifested in that, very prime example is I'd be in a meeting and just fall asleep, because if other people are talking, I'm not talking. There's no stimulation. I mean, if the meeting room is dark, I will fall asleep. And I remember pinching myself to stay awake, and I got 8 hours. I'm not sleep deprived. So I just couldn't understand why I was just falling asleep a lot. So that was something which was really bizarre, and I didn't know it was to do with ADHD. I just thought I was lazy. I just thought, oh my God, you are so lazy. You can't even stay awake for this meeting. Now I know it's because I need stimulation. Not all meetings you need to attend. Be really aware which meetings to attend, and be prepared, if you are not speaking a lot, to have a stim toy or something there that can keep you awake, like drinking water or something like that. Other things that played out was, again, just being in an office when there's no natural light or plugs, and being in the middle of a room full of fluorescent lighting. I didn't realize it started making me really sick, and the temperatures, it would be too cold or too hot, and that really impacted me. I mean, I was the only one in the office that had a blanket on all the time, through the summer because it would be aircon, through the winter because it wouldn't be warm enough, and it just really impacted me kind of mentally. Without the sunlight and everything like that, it just affected my focus levels. The other thing is just, again, perceptions. So the perception, of course, that as an Asian working in finance, you should be really good at your job. You should be really, focused at your desk all the time. You shouldn't be really chatty. So all those expectations really made me kind of glued to my chair, and I wasn't really myself. I realized I was masking heavily just to appear competent or appear like everyone else. So yeah, those are the things, and those really eat at you. like they really do eat at you daily. And I would come to work and people would ask me, how are you, Kim? And I'd be, I am so tired. I'm so exhausted. And I didn't understand why. And now I know it's because of masking. It was because of the lack of accommodations, the lack of me overcompensating for everything. So I did start to ask for accommodations, but just for my dyslexia, because I didn't know about ADHD. But the accommodations I asked for, they would apply to dyslexia and they would work. But of course, I was struggling with ADHD symptoms that I had no idea about. So I would say, like, the awareness, now that if you know you have ADHD, you don't need a diagnosis to start advocating for yourself. A diagnosis only tells you something you already know. So I would say, just start, if you feel empowered enough, start the empowerment by asking for accommodations. I would, as a junior, I mean, I'm not that junior anymore, but the point is I'm not very senior, but I would go to HR because by the Equality Act, if you ask for accommodations by law, they should give it to you because neurodiversity is classified under the Disability Act. So, but my surprise has been that a lot of HR professionals don't really know a lot about neurodiversity. They've never really had conversations before about accommodations with neurodiverse people. It's not, I mean, that really surprised me. And I realized because in the training and people who've studied, HR management at universities, neurodiversity is not a topic that's touched on. And that really surprised me. So unfortunately, I mean, the labor shouldn't be put on neurodiverse people to do the work, but I think leaders need to do a lot of work. Not just HR professionals, leaders, right? Because neurodiverse people, even though it's a non-visible, I hate the word disability, but it's a non-visible disability, leaders still should do the work, So, yeah.
I agree. Do you know what, Kim, when you were saying that, I was like, oh, those things, this happens to me all the time. I want everybody to know this. You perpetually discover, oh, that's another one of those symptoms that I didn't know was a symptom. I used to fall asleep in my older agency in the financial presentations, which is super bad. Like, this is a quarterly time to show up and say what you want. And without fail, they put on a dark room, put in a projector, lots of people, quite warm. And I would be literally doing what you're saying, like pinching myself under my arm, going, stay awake, stay awake, stay awake.
I mean, it makes me question, why are meetings in a dark room? Like, why can't they be outside with nature?
Right. And the thing you were saying about changing your physicality, I used to bring a hot water bottle to work in the winter, and everyone just made a joke, oh, you're so Australian. I was like, I've lived here for more than 20 years. I'm not as Australian as you think I am. I just get real comfort from this, and it keeps me in my chair, probably because it was weighted as well, right? I'd forgotten about that, but it was not a great work environment for being neurotypical at that particular place.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of quirks there. I mean, quote quirks, but now once you get diagnosed, it all starts to make sense. And
yeah, completely. I really responded to lots of what you're saying. I'm just having those little aha moments, which I've discovered I'll have for the rest of my life.
Well, I think that's a really nice way to seg into the accommodations, the asking for accommodations question, the dealing with requests for accommodations. As you said earlier, it's absolutely okay to ask for this. By law, you need to be given accommodations, but people can be quite nervous about dealing with these things, whether they're asking or receiving the requests. Kim, perhaps do you have any guidance or advice for managers or colleagues who might want to have this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to say that there is a government program called Access to Work, and that is literally a government fund for helping disabled people with accommodation. So whether that's technology, coaching, so that's free. All you have to do is sign up for that. And that removes a lot of the burden from you to go to HR or managers, because once you sign up to that program, an assessor will call you and ask you about your symptoms. They were not symptoms, but your neurodiversity. They'll ask about what is difficult at work, and they'll basically give you a 10-page report on some of the accommodations that you may need. And then you can give that to work and say, hi, like all the work's been done. These are all the accommodations. These are the things that you need to pay for, because so whatever, they'll give you a quote at the end, if it's coaching, if it's technology, whatever you need. A percentage of that will be paid by the organization, depending on how big the organization is. And the other part of the cost is the government fund of Access to Work. So it costs nothing. All you have to do is sign up. And a lot of people don't know about this. And it just blows my mind, because it's free help and it really helps remove all the burden of that conversation. I'll stop.
Awesome. No, I think that's really useful to know. So it's called Access to Work, it's a government program.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And Rachelle, I mean, you are a senior leader in a corporate. So, but how have you navigated these accessibility or requirement conversations?
Yeah, I think lots of mine isn't coming from a very formal place, I should say. I actually spend a lot of time saying to people, by the way, have you ever looked into diagnosis? There's a lot. I work with a lot of incredible women who I perceive to be similar to myself, and I've encouraged some diagnosis. I've had one person in my team have a diagnosis recently, not my doing. So helping her navigate some of the challenges, but giving her space to tell me what they look and feel like is part of it. For example, with her, I've asked our PM to work very closely with her to help her come up with time management tools. Time management is a real problem with ADHD. It's not problem for me as a manager per se, but the stress that you put on yourself trying to meet deadlines can be very intense, and it's not a nice human experience. So for example, one of my personal tools is to say, well, I need to deliver the following things in the next 6 weeks. I generally will not show up to that until the very last minute if I don't put in check-ins. They have to be accountability check-ins. So I identify an appropriate accountability partner and say, I need you to keep me honest. I need you to do a review of me with me at this point in this project. So I know that this is a tool that works for me. So I can share some of these tools with other people and say, I recommend you do this. Do you want to try it? Would you like me to be your accountability partner? So there's an enforced deadline that helps with some regulation of time management. There's some stuff in there about rejection sensitive dysphoria. Criticism, perceived criticism, rejection, perceived rejection is or nearly catastrophic for a lot of people. So if someone's able to tell me, or if I think that they might have ADHD, I then start talking to them about what's the best way of receiving feedback. I'd love for us to make this project the best way it could possibly be. This is absolutely not on you. This is on us as a team, and creating structures that help people understand I'm looking for their best self rather than giving direct feedback. It is a very small tweak, but it helps with improvement. And I found that for myself as well. If I ever get very pointy direct feedback, I will rage about it for a week, and I have to kind of put aside the things about it that I'm taking personally, knowing that I have that need for that accountability. And the other thing is on creating boundaries. This is not always easy work. Not a lot of people understand they can do it, especially more junior members. So I'm often saying, where is your boundaries? Where are you starting your day? Where is your breaks? How often are your breaks? Where is the end of your day? How many emails have you said no to this week? How many people have you sent elsewhere for solutions? So I'm not just seeking kind of results on delivery. I'm also seeking results on activating boundaries. And this is good for, I think, just for managers in general, by the way. I do it with my whole team, but I think the more boundaries you can create, the clearer you can get. We're a very pressured team. We have a lot of asks on us, and we're going through a lot of change actually as a team. So openness, I think, is important as well in that, and being as honest as you can as a leader as well is pretty paramount. So I'm honest about the things I find difficult, the things I'm frustrated by, and then this, another generalized leadership thing, but I do really feel like it helps, is keeping a kind of log of the good stuff. So you have to report on good stuff, right? You have to be like, here's what we did in this quarter. And that's not what I'm talking about. I call it aha and ta-da instead of to-do, right? So just nice things. This person said a nice thing. Let's put it over here and remember, they said you did great. I'm glad they helped you. I'm glad that this thing went well. So that when we're having those tougher conversations, creating boundaries, talking about rejection sensitivity, we can go back to them and go, do you know what? This is all the great stuff about us, and this is the bit we're going to tweak. It's not a science, it's an art for sure. But that's roughly where I focus my time for it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rachelle. I'm mindful of time. We've got quite a few questions coming in from the audience, so I'd like to turn to them shortly. But before I do, maybe if we just round out this official side of it with one question for you both. You know, we have obviously called this event Harnessing the Superpower, and we certainly have some community members who have referenced their ADHD as their superpower at work. How do you feel about that term, Kim? Maybe if we start with you.
Yeah, I think I really struggle with it because on one hand, I do recognize traits that I really, really, really appreciate, like the hyperfocus, the creativity, the empathy. These are things that I really, really appreciate. But I think it also takes away how difficult it is to live in a world that's built for the neurotypical. And unfortunately with ADHD, a lot of our traits don't align with what systems and processes are in place to that is built in the neurotypical world. So it really makes, I don't know, it's a bit of a disconnect because the struggles are real, but also the strengths are real too. So I do struggle with that, but I'd be very interested to hear what Rachelle thinks.
Yeah, I've got a funny love-hate relationship with it. So I love that it helps people who don't know very much about ADHD to reframe a bit, because most people are going to see it as a chaotic energy that's unfocused and unruly. And that is not my lived experience of it. It's not how I think most adult women show up with it, for example. So thinking there might be more to it than just not great stuff, helpful for sure. I saw a great comedian joke about it, and he said, I don't know how I feel about people saying, for example, autism is a superpower. He's like, not going to call on Marvel and say, can you show up and be really uncomfortable here for us? Thank you. So I get that there's elements of ADHD in which you wouldn't, I would not be your team organizer of your most important tools. I would show up to a bank heist without the secret skeleton key. I know this, but I do know that there's things that we do differently that make us more successful in other areas. And I think the superpower language helps to bring some of that forward. I had friends who, when I told them about my diagnosis, said, oh, do you know, I'm so relieved. And I went, really, why? And they were like, you're just exhausting the amount of stuff that you're doing. And actually, my brain doesn't work like yours. And so I don't have to keep up with you. And I was like, why would you, what? How is this? So I think comparatively, that's detrimental to everybody, right? I also, I'm exhausted, and it's not a wise way of living. But I think letting people know that some of your strengths are very special, then the language helps. But exclusively trading on it as a superpower, not so helpful.
Yeah, and Natalie's brought up a really good point in the chat that portraying people with disabilities as superhuman or inspirational simply because of that disability feels a bit condescending sometimes. So yeah. Awesome. Well, you have been asking loads and loads of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to throw these out there, and if you feel moved to answer, please do. I know I'm going to risk people talking over each other with this approach, so the first question that came in, do you think neurodiversity inclusion is creeping up on the business agenda, and what industries seem most receptive to nurturing their neurodiversity inclusion? Maybe I know Lego's held up a lot, Rachelle, so maybe if we go to you. You're not here as a Lego spokesperson, of course, but how have you seen neurodiversity on the business agenda lately?
It's interesting. I think all diversity is getting some attention. And so the halo effect of being part of diversity and inclusion is important. I would challenge how easy it is to be inclusive if it's invisible. Not sure how many people are confident to be out in the world showcasing their neurodiversity yet, for various reasons. I think it's very hard to say that I have a complex brain and hire me, I'm the best, without it feels scary. It genuinely feels like a frightening thing, and I get it. So I would say it is rising on the agenda. I'm not sure we're at an inclusive place yet. That's my personal experience so far, and that's not reflective of my work, by the way. I do get very well supported at work, but I mean in more general terms.
Awesome, thank you, Rachelle. How about you, Kim? How do you see it on the business agenda?
Yeah, so I could speak on behalf just at least of the past year that I've been advocating. I am one of those people that shared on LinkedIn that I got diagnosed and I've been sharing my journey. I just felt like that was my way of healing and just unleashing my sort of frustration of the lack of awareness in businesses, etc. So, and from that, I have noticed that, especially in certain sectors, especially the technology sector, is very receptive. So I've had contacts from companies wanting me to come in to kind of educate the team more about neurodiversity. And I believe that's because I haven't found the statistics for this, it's mainly gut feeling, but that neurodiverse people are very attracted to workplaces that have some structure, but not enough to kind of really, I guess, suppress the creativity and the flexibility that we need to operate. I think neurodiverse people really struggle in organizations that are very structured. I mean, I'm talking about finance in particular, and my experience in finance, it was very suffocating. So definitely tech industry and creative industries. So like marketing, all of those creative industries, I have seen more emphasis. And I think it's because we do recognize that they have a higher proportion of neurodiverse people in their workforce. But a lot of the sort of, it sounds quite bad, but a lot of it is still on the surface. I feel like there's not enough deep work being done as of yet, but so far it looks promising. But I can only attest to certain industries.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, it feels like, certainly I've been in the creative and marketing industries for most of my working life, and it feels like it's a little bit more accepted there, maybe. I don't know, it's a bit more open to it. I can see we've got a lot of questions around accommodations that we've kind of touched on. So those who are asking about accommodations at work, if you have any specific requests, please do pop them back into the slides. Maggie's asking what the most helpful practical support you've had is and how it made a difference for you. So yeah, Kim.
Sorry. So my headphones, they're noise cancelling, and they're just great, because if I want to put sort of focus music on to listen, that's great. I'm not disturbing anyone, and it really blocks out sound, and that has really helped me with my work.
Sure. How about you, Rachelle?
I actually think this is less specific in terms of workplace accommodation, but actually just incredibly helpful to me. And that was me finding a therapist that specializes in ADHD accommodation, so that I could talk about the complexity that is me as a human being and not have to explain what I mean by X. So I don't have to explain to her why I can't just sit my 6-year-old son down with an iPad for an hour and get some work done, because she won't expect that to be a thing that he can do. She'll understand implicitly when I say he's neurodiverse, oh yeah, this is very complicated. So if I'm trying to do work in the evenings and my son is around, there's his chaos, my chaos, and together it's chaotic as all get out. But I think having someone to empathize and offer other solutions has been actually very helpful to me from a professional capacity. Workplace wise, this is a really stupid one, but do you know what? It was a gift that was given to me recently. My chaotic desktop apparently is not a sign that I'm a disorganized person. It's a sign that I'm neurodiverse. And I was recently taught on my Mac that if I right click, sort by stack, it will sort all of the similar types of things together. So it'll make a folder of screenshots and a folder of PDFs and a folder of PowerPoints. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me to help me get organized when I had the time. Really small things like that can stop with the overwhelm. And I think there's lots of very small tech things like that that are out there. You just don't you don't, until you say them to someone. I just said, oh God, my desktop really stresses me out. And they were like, oh, how about this? So there's a vocalization that goes with accommodation as well.
Awesome. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. So Natalie's asking, now that you understand more about your certain personality traits, what would you tell your younger self? Rachelle, I saw you wave.
Such a good question. Oh my goodness. Do you know what? I felt a lot of time with my younger self that I like many people, you spend this, I think you spend a lot of time on this weird pendulum swing of like conforming and non-conforming. I did an arts degree, I did a design degree, non-conforming, I need to go in the workplace, conforming, didn't have a stable relationship for a really long time, non-conforming, went traveling, non-conforming, didn't have a stable job. I think this is a really normal pattern for young people, and it's totally fine. What I didn't know is, if I knew I was neurodiverse, I should have understood what parts were non-conforming and what weren't, what was just the way my brain was always going to be. And I think had I known those things, I would have focused my energy more clearly in the places that helped me just work out how I was going to show up in the world. That for me, I think, is probably the biggest one.
Great. Thank you, Rachelle. How about you, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much exactly the same thing, which is to not conform. I think, yeah, I was just obsessed with kind of one way of operating in the world, trying my best to kind of fit in with everybody else. And it really took a toll on my energy, really took a toll on my identity as a creative person, because I always was a creative, outspoken person, but all of that was masked for so long. And I think that's what I would tell my younger self as well, is to lean into, you know, your creative tendencies, whatever that you felt right, and anything that felt wrong, just, you know, it feels wrong for a reason. I think that's really hard, because it's not just the gender element, but cultural aspect that I had to deal with parents' expectations and stuff like that. So that's something that I would have told myself, but it's changed now. I tell myself that every day now. So it makes me feel better now, but that's definitely what I would have told my younger self.
Yeah, sure. Awesome. Jennifer's just got a message for you both, saying, I'm impacted by your personal stories and honoured to receive. I'm also the mum to a neurodivergent school-age child and a friend and colleague to many more folks with brilliant brains. So thank you for that, Jennifer.
That's very cool.
Sarah's asking, she's a colleague who's been recently diagnosed with ADHD and a marginal diagnosis as part of her own anxiety. Any tips on how to make the workplace more inclusive?
There is actually a resource out there that I use. Again, this is not an expert, this is a personal thing I've discovered, that I use when I was freelancing, because I find it very difficult showing up into quite complex integrated teams to make change, just interpersonality wise. It's called a Manual of Me, and it is used for freelancers to work through their preferences. So whether or not you actually do the manual, you could look at the questions. So it's like, at what time of the day am I at my best? How do I prefer to work in teams? Is there any signs that you should look out for if I'm feeling overwhelmed? Small things like that. I think this is a really good exercise to do so that you can get to know yourself and your team and your best way of working. Because if you find out that you all have a great time of day that suits you, lock that down. And if you find you don't, have a discussion together to work out why, for example. I think for me, it's that self-awareness helps to unpick some of this.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of things, but absolutely the self-awareness, because ADHD actually plays out very differently in everyone, in all our lives. It's so different. So I always recommend to my clients to have an ADHD book. It could be digital or, you know, physical. And honestly, when things start coming to your head, just write them down, and then write down what may help. And you'll be surprised how once you make that commitment to be more aware of, you know, your ADHD and what systems or processes you can put in place, either personal or at work, that becomes, you know, it becomes something where you constantly do it. It's a strengthening thing, and you build awareness and you build confidence because you know what you're talking about. You know how ADHD plays out in you, and that's where it starts, where you can start making change by talking to the right people, and all that trickles down. So I think you'd be surprised at how much a lot of, inclusivity comes from us first, knowing ourselves, and then sharing that with somebody else.
Sure. Awesome. I can see a lot of the other questions are around the adjustments, the some of the stuff we've already covered. So maybe if we leave it there, because we are coming up to the end of the session. Thank you so much for both of you for sharing. I'm going to ask one final question of you both, and maybe if we start with you, Rachelle, any final thoughts on what we've spoken about today? Any parting words of wisdom for the people that have been attending?
Yeah, I think these conversations aren't always easy. When people are talking about the way their brain functions, from everything from mental health to mental illness to accessibility and complexity, the more space that you can make to accommodate for people to share these things with you, the better it becomes. I would encourage you to stick in a space of empathetic listening rather than seeking people to disclose things or forcing diagnosis or anything like that. I really think if people are as observant as possible, they'll quickly glean a way of working with themselves and their teams and the people around them that brings out their best side anyway. So regardless of ADHD, I would say that that is a really lovely space for people to focus in on if they want to be really supportive and inclusive.
Thanks, Rachelle. How about you, Kim?
It's okay. Yeah.
Sorry, any parting words of wisdom for the people?
Yeah, I think especially for people who are getting a diagnosis or know a loved one who's getting a diagnosis, I think it's a journey, and get all the support you need for that journey, whether it's your family or online support network, which has been huge for me. Be prepared for that journey, because it is a journey. There'll be ups and highs, there'll be lows, and honestly, there'll be hard days too, but it can only get better because now we know what we're up against, and we know how to tailor the environment and systems to kind of help us unmask, right? So that's what I would say, just a word of hope that it gets better and that it is a journey. So buckle up.
Great stuff. Thank you so much. If those in the room, please unmute and let us give Rachelle and Kim a big round of applause for being so open with us today and sharing. Thank you very much.